Well, here we are again. I'm David,
And I'm Gail.
and we're right now heading on another CTM bus ride this time from Chefchaouen to the city of Fez. And it was a 4-hour bus ride, quite long, with a pit stop about halfway through for lunchtime, or an early lunch, really.
And that's when I open my eyes. It's not through lack of interest.
Yeah. So, anyways, we arrived in Fez and headed to our Ryad Mambrouka. This is the outside of the Ryad. You can see, typical of the streets in any Medina, really doesn't tell you what's beyond those walls, but this is what's beyond. This is a beautiful Ryad that we were staying at, with a large central courtyard. Was open to the sky, although they've installed a skylight. This is our room. It's the Merindes room.
There were, in fact, 8 rooms that opened off of that central court.
And just by point of reference, this one happened to cost $150 Canadian per night. It was a pretty nice digs, actually, and we stayed here for I believe it was 3 nights in total.
Beautifully appointed, very palatial.
So now we're heading out for an afternoon walk in the nearby souks of the Medina. Souks are sort of devoted to particular crafts or food items or what have you. So you just saw a little bit of the food souk. Then there's also textile souks as well.
This is nougat, which is a lovely specialty of honey, egg whites, nuts, sometimes fruit. A lot of sweets, and we're seeing sweets as we approach the holy period of Ramadan.
So it was a pretty casual afternoon, and we finished off back at our Ryad Mambrouka for dinner up in the mezzanine level, which had a very nice view looking out over the Medina, and had a very nice dinner there.
And here we see the typical Fez pottery. It's blue and white. Different cities feature different colors.
Yeah, and of course, typically of a meal here, we would have an entree and then various salads, more or less, and then followed by, in this case, a tahine, lots of vegetables, and then followed by a dessert.
Flan in this case.
Yeah, which is nice light finish for the meal, and that was pretty much it. It had been a pretty busy day with the bus ride and touring the Medina, and that's the rooftop view from our Ryad, and we're just getting ready for the next day. So here we are sitting down for our included breakfast back up in the mezzanine dining room. Had a very nice outdoor garden with a swimming pool as well.
Here we are, and we're at a school for learning the Quran.
Yes, it's apologies for our pronunciation, but this is the Inania Medersa, which dates from 1350 to 1355.
And we were accompanied by a guide. He spent the day with us, and his name was Saeed Abali, and he was like the king of Kensington. Everybody knew him and would embrace him, but without him we would never have been able to negotiate the labyrinth, which is the Medina.
Yeah,
he was great.
Yeah. And so briefly, a Koranic school is basically, it's got a mosque and it's got a prayer hall, and it's dedicated to the study of religion, science, law, and the arts. This one is a particularly fine Medersa.
And this is outside that building, and we'll see a few other views of it from the outside.
Yeah, this is right here is the outside of the Medersa. The street views, more or less.
This is an old landmark from the 14th century. The water clock, all that exists are 13 beams extending over the road.
So with our guide, we're just touring again the different souks and some of the historic sites in the Medina. Quite a fine city, actually, and we're walking now through some of the lanes in the Medina itself just exploring them with our guide. And it might be just right now just to talk a little bit briefly about what is a medina. And basically it is I've mentioned this before, but it's a walled, basically a walled city, and it's divided in quarters. And it might not be, a medina might seem a rather chaotic place with streets running every which way, but really it's divided into quarters. It has a very loose social organization, and that are defined by certain features, such as every quarter would have a communal oven, would have a hammam or a steam bath, would have a Koranic school or a Medersa, might have a grocery shop, would definitely have a mosque, and would also have various fountains as well.
You just see how narrow it is. There are hundreds and hundreds of these little narrow lanes. So you really do have to have a local to show you around. Otherwise you get lost, which is no problem, but you also don't see all that you might.
And what makes the Fez Medina so endearing really is that it is entirely pedestrian. The only other traffic, it might be a donkey carrying goods, or it might be a person pulling a cart through the Medina streets. That's it. There's no cars, there's no motorcycles in this case, just pure walking.
In fact, Fez's Medina is said to be the world's largest car-free urban area.
So this is the Fondouk Nejjarine. Again, apologies for pronunciation, but a Fondouk is basically it's like a roadside inn, quite an elaborate one. It was designed to be offer food and rest and lodging for traders, and this one happens to be one of the finest in the city. It dates back to the 18th century and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
It included stables for animals, so it's kind of an animal hotel as well as a hotel for the owners.
Yeah.
And here we are continuing through the souks, but we're now going to a restaurant that had been recommended to us by Saeed, and it overlooked the city, and you'll be seeing that very shortly. He's handsome, isn't he? Here we are.
Just a variety of dishes that he recommended, and was served to us up on the rooftop of the restaurant.
He left though for prayers.
Yes, he did. Yes.
And here we're overlooking the tannery, the Chouara Tannery, that dates back from at least the 16th century. And those vats contain dye and liquids that soften the leather with the help of pigeon excrement. Oh, now here we've got the metal section where copper implements are made, and there's a tapping, just like the medieval period, but this goes even beyond that, even earlier. And you'd have the jewelry section, and you would have the pottery section. Very, very much a guild kind of a consideration. And there's Saeed. Yeah,
we're saying goodbye to him, and we're just heading again once more back to our riad. And we decided to have another dinner there. It's quite a nice place, convenient place to have a nice dinner.
And there we have that great dessert.
Yeah.
So this is our final day in Fez, which began with the American Fondouk, which is really a veterinary clinic and place for respite for street animals, specifically equine animals. So there would be donkeys and mules and horses who were injured or in somehow need of care. The caregivers are international students, veterinary students, and we were taken around by a young veterinary student about to graduate within weeks from Glasgow, the home of James Herriot, the legendary vet.
Who she revered.
Don't we all? So here we saw close to 20 animals who in some way needed help. They would be again given back to their people, and they would then again resume their street and farm duties. Often they would have colic, which is kind of a gas buildup in their stomach areas, or they would be injured by the back ends of wagons that would kind of hurt their haunches. We had one mare who had been kicked in the belly, and she was about to have a foal in 2 weeks. A couple of abandoned mules. So it was really a gratifying visit, and it's been in existence since 1929 with the donations of people.
So now we're continuing our journey just around the corner. Actually, we're heading to the Mellah, which is the old Jewish district. Although the Jewish population has essentially disappeared.
Right. At one time, there were, believe it or not, 250,000 people living in the Mellah. Now there is only a handful of Jewish families, and they live basically in the new town of Fez.
And this is now the Jewish cemetery, of course, you can see, and just at the edge of the Mellah.
And we will be now entering the synagogue Ben Danan Synagogue. Inside we see the predominant blue that you see in Jewish iconography, handcrafted materials, beautiful tile work, the velvet and embroidered mantle covering the Torah, which is of original deer skin.
And here we are now, we're heading back into the Mellah. Of course, the silver trade was very big with the Jewish population as a trade there.
But many of the Jewish families had left for Israel, the US, and Canada, and taught the trade to the people staying behind.
Anyways, we ended up getting a tour by an unlicensed guide, a guy who just sort of introduced himself and started taking us around. So we said, oh, what the heck, we might as well follow him. And then he took us into some interesting areas in the Mellah, just to sort of explore some of the narrow streets.
Yeah, it was a bit different, a bit foisted on us, but we would, again, not have seen these interesting quarters. Oh, now there's some restoration that's being conducted, so that includes this carved door, and this, I think, is a UNESCO site.
These are some of the restored doors here, in the Mellah itself. Cute cat on display with a bunch of belts. And now we're exploring this is a nearby garden called Janan's Bill. We took a nice tour through here. It was a nice cooling place to go through. It was quite hot on this particular day. There's lots of fountains and quite an enjoyable place. It was recommended that we go through here.
There were also some little canals, but the full fountains weren't in a total operation, and this is because there's a bit of a drought, and it's something we're going to see when we get into the countryside beyond Fez in coming episodes.
Yeah, and so here we have an interesting transition to our lunch, which was just outside the gardens, just sort of a street side patio, more or less. Had a nice, again, fruit drinks, soup, and some sweets to go with it. And now we're at Dar Glawi, or the Glawi Palace, which is inside the Medina. And it's a late 19th century, early 20th century palace.
It was built by the Pasha of Marrakesh, not of Fez, but of the other great imperial city.
Yeah, so it's had a rather rough history. The French took it over in about 1912, and then after that it's basically deteriorated. However, it is managed by a local artist. He goes simply by the name Abdu. However, when we went in here, we really didn't know that. We just came in because it was an interesting palace. But as you toured through it, it revealed all sorts of interesting little secrets and quirks. For example, this little room had been devoted to CDs and records and musical instruments. There is another small room that's devoted to all sorts of camera equipment. I was quite intrigued by that. Pictures of somebody playing golf. Just incredibly eccentric. And then slowly you find out that there's canvases hanging around here. You go into one room and there's some of his abstract paintings right here.
Very typical of his work.
Yeah, very typical of his work. Anyways, this is the artist himself, Abdu, who we met on the way out. And we asked, "Are you actually the artist?" And he said, "Yes, he was." And there's an interesting little article behind him.
It's now supper time, our last supper in Fez, and it's at a riad that was introduced to us by our tour guide of the day before, Saeed.
And you can see that it's cat friendly. And we're just going to leave you with a little bit of music that we were listening to while we were eating our dinner. It was quite a very pleasant experience. And this is, in fact, our last day in Fez. Tomorrow we'll be leaving, and we'll see you next episode as we head off into the Sahara Desert.